Yeah. And welcome back. Well, we have a return instructor with us today, Jerry Bender. Nice to have you back with us. And of course, you're with the Saddleback Emeritus Institute.
Yes, I am.
New fall semester. Well, it started a few weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago. And you were telling me that you love teaching here because there are certain things, philosophy, you teach film as literature, where maybe for younger students meeting in high school, it may not mean quite as much, but certainly to a lot of folks here, it does, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think anyone who's been to the university, you mentioned philosophy, and boy, you get the eyes rolling.
Right.
And they hate it, it's reluctant. And the old style of teaching it was to just fill up students' minds with all this information about Socrates, Baruch Spinoza, whomever. And so you became experts about these people. You took your test and you flunked or succeeded or whatever. But since World War II, we've had a whole new emphasis that philosophers and instructors in philosophy love rescuing it from the ivory towers and bringing it right back down to earth, which is really where it began in ancient Greece anyways. And the older mind, the mature mind, loves to contemplate and meditate on important questions that philosophically we ask, we reflect upon all the time. So I think that kind of explains this widespread appeal among older adults that a philosophical discussion about anything, morality, loyalty, love, shame, dignity, relationships, it just sparks great conversation, and then it promotes your own insight. You get to ask yourself questions from it.
Yeah.
So you can see right here where we are in this extraordinary village we live in of older, sophisticated minds. It's just such a compatible thing to do for a couple of hours a week in a classroom.
I remember last time you were here, we were talking about how, you mentioned philosophy, and then people think, okay, Socrates and all that, which is fine, but we forget the modern day philosophers that we've had today.
Yes.
Whether or not they are just great leaders or book writers. Maya Angelou, there's a good example. And last time I think we talked about
Eric Hoffer,
Steve Jobs, and things like that. People who are willing to get up and speak eloquently about a lot of different things. Well, those are our modern day philosophers,
They
aren't
absolutely are. And on Monday in my class, on Monday past, we took some time to talk about Wayne Dyer and Oliver Sacks, who had just recently departed this past weekend. Extraordinary neurologist, beautiful, wondrous things to say about life and its meaning and purpose. And Wayne Dyer, who was given away to foster parents as a child. His mom couldn't take care of him, and grows up to be this wonderfully meditative, insightful human being, writes lots of popular books, and was a springboard for so many people by asking so many important questions about your purpose, your meaning, your relationships, your goal, your bliss, things that our minds kind of turn to when we're reflecting upon the same old ancient questions. Where am I? What am I doing? Where am I going? What's this all about? So in a classroom, it's fantastic because in my class, say 140 adults, you have so much widespread experience and wonderful savvy and insight coming from these adults, these veterans of life. So the discussion, I think, if young people were to sit and watch from the sidelines, they'd go, wow, getting older has its benefits. People are smart, clever, and attuned to themselves and love reflecting and probing, asking questions. So it serves a very functional, pragmatic, useful basis, philosophy. And so I think we've rescued it now from the dry, dusty tomes and the boring rooms and seminars.
It sounds like it. And along those same lines is film as literature. And tell us about what's your approach to that?
Well, I think I'm part of a tradition that goes back at least to the 1960s, where film as literature began to appear in film schools and English literature departments as a new form of fluency. So they'll call it a cinematic fluency. And the emphasis has always been to show your students a film and teach them all about its structure, how it, in a sense, is like a book, but a plot, characters, theme, symbols, leitmotif, for example, a denouement, a climax, a character development, and get from it edification, enlightenment, a springboard for discussion, but let them also understand the technical parts of it, the way films are lit, or the way scenes are lit,
Right.
the way shots are taken, the way symbols are shown. And this seems to have captured the imagination of youth and older adults throughout the country. So now, not only in universities, but in extension divisions, lifelong learning institutes, as the one we have here, great enrollment. So we have actually here in Laguna Woods 7 sections of that class, 7 different times a week we teach it, 4 instructors, upwards of 600 students who want to come, watch a film, get instruction in what is it we're about to watch, let's discuss it. And of course, as you would imagine, if you have, as I do, say 165 people in the class, you'll get 165 different responses.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I was watching the series a while back. In fact, I rewatched one of the episodes. It was on PBS. I think it was called American Geniuses. I may have that title wrong, but it was basically about the great rivalries that were out there between different factions of the same industry. The one I watched, rewatched actually last night, was Pulitzer versus, of course, Hearst.
Hearst.
And of course, Pulitzer was on the East Coast at first, and Hearst is, of course, on the West Coast, and then, you know, went right back to New York and bought a paper there. But the point was that it was really the movie Citizen Kane where people got to understand through that film, even though the name was Kane, but it paralleled Hearst's life. They said if it wasn't for that film and the fact that he tried to get that film stopped, Hearst probably, they would have heard the name, but he would have been more about, okay, yeah, the guy who owns newspapers and, you know, a Hollywood studio and all, but that really is about it. It was due to that story that was in one of the greatest films of all time.
You're right.
That brought forth who this Hearst was. It's quite, and he didn't want that, but had he just been quiet, that would have been the end of it.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, as you know, we have lists of like great books that have changed the world, and now you can consult any number of lists. Great films that have changed thinking and feeling about human existence, and there's any number of them, from Schindler's List to Citizens Kane, Fried Green Tomatoes.
Oh, that was a great movie.
Movies that people go, that's a great movie. This is touching my heart. This is making me think anew. So film, when they have their awards nights, you know, they stand there and they make these self-serving speeches about how wonderful their industry is. I'm beginning to respect that is their mission. They don't, yes, they do serve up a lot of mindless entertainment, but the ones who take it seriously, as you're pointing out, are there to tell a story, a narrative, to shed light on something, whether it's malevolence of the human spirit or warfare, or how relationships are made and break or sustained, and how love can triumph and so forth and so on, and how you can recoup from failure. So yes, the 21st century, definitely the century where film is coming to teach us, just as books used to, and maybe still do, but it sure is vying with books for how we like to get informed.
Yeah, it certainly is that. And some of the films we've shown here, we just showed a week or two ago, Being There, with, of course, Peter Sellers.
Right.
And talk about a story and philosophy together. We're really looking at what's going on here.
Yes.
It's fascinating. And then right up to many of the films we see today, that was like about 1980, that film, but many of the features that we see today, yes, there's a lot of mindless ones out there, but it's story driven, so much so that you really begin to go beyond with just the surface that you're seeing.
And it can transcend generations.
Yeah.
Next week, in my next week's class, I'm going to be showing the film that Sean Penn made from the John Krakauer book, Into the Wild. A young man throws off his parents' conventional lifestyle, graduates college, gives up his trust fund, gets rid of all his material attachments, and strikes off for this new life that he wants to encounter in Alaska. Almost like a Jack Kerouac on the road 60 years later. And yet people in their 70s and 80s and 90s have seen the film, and they sit there and they're touched once again by their own youthful hopes and dreams and
Interesting.
aspirations.
I don't think I know that film. I've heard of it, but I don't think I've seen that
It took
one.
him 10 years to get it made. He needed to get permission from the Krakow, I'm sorry, from that family of that boy.
Yeah.
Not throw them under the bus.
Right.
And they finally consented and agreed, and it's a beautiful film.
Interesting.
And so but it shows you again, these films can really transcend race,
Yeah.
religion, generations, and speak to us.
Well, very good.
Yeah.
Great courses that you teach. How long have you been doing this for, Emeritus?
You know, I've been here for 8 years, but as I mentioned to you last time, I'm in my 52nd year. I started as this kid, 22 years old, and they threw me in a room with older adults, and then it was like love at first sight.
Great.
This is early 62, so those students of mine were born in the 1880s and 90s.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the stories they
Oh,
were
yeah.
telling me? And that was it. I was off and running, and
That's amazing.
stayed with it.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
You
It's a
know,
pleasure.
as I said last time, I can see your passion and your love for this, and it's professors like yourself that make the Emeritus program so great. Because,
Thank you so much.
You've been
Yeah,
doing
we have
this
a
for so
great
long.
crew.
It's wonderful.
Wonderful leadership, dynamic, visionary, and very responsive to our demographics. Who's here? What do we need to offer? Let's keep working on
Yeah.
it. Of course, the students make it a great payoff. You know, they're fabulous.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Hope we
Thank
see you again.
I hope so.
All right. We'll be right back. Sure.